Deesa's in the house. Hello, Deesa. How are you? Yeah, Deesa served our church very well for many years as administrative assistant. Now I think she's doing brain surgery or something. I'm not real sure, but oh dear. Okay. Even babies have the capacity to express a desire for a better world. They can cry. They can fuss, they can throw tantrums, all with the purpose of saying, what's happening to me right now should not be happening. This is not supposed to be the way my life goes. Somebody do something about this now. Even before they have any audible words, a baby can let you know, I want things to be different than they are. You all did that too when you were babies. And it doesn't stop when we're babies, does it? We move on up through all of life at every phase of life, and we keep running into this kind of feeling like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. My life is not exactly like I thought it would work out. I don't like what's happening. I want things to be better for myself, for my loved ones. I want the world to get along better, to be more peaceful and just and loving. This is not the way I want it to be. I think that desire is probably transported through the ages best by music. Maybe you've heard some of these lyrics. Somewhere over the rainbow, the skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. How about this one? There's a place for us. Somewhere, a place for us. Peace and quiet and open air wait for us somewhere. Someday, somehow we'll find a new way of living. We'll find a way of forgiving somewhere. Or I know a place. Ain't nobody crying. Ain't nobody worried. Ain't no smiling faces lying to the races. I'll take you there. I see my light come shining from the west down to the east. Any day now, I shall be released. I was born by the river in a little tent. Oh, and I've been just like that river running ever since. It's been a long, long time coming. But I know a change is going to come. When the last child cries for a crust of bread, when the last man dies for just words that he said, when there's shelter over the poorest head, we shall be free. When the last thing we notice is the color of the skin, and the first thing we look for is the beauty within, when the skies and the oceans are clean again, we shall be free. The problem with our noblest dreams is that we don't seem to know exactly how to get there. And if we do figure out how to get there, we can't seem to make ourselves do what we need to do in order for that future to come. And sometimes we want something to happen really badly, and it happens, but it doesn't make much of a change of any kind. It doesn't give us the pure bliss that we thought it would. I talk to old folks. There are some people older than me. Did you know that? A few, and I found them, and some of them will say, when I was a young man, I used to think, if I can just not have to walk behind this mule anymore, if I could just see the ocean sometime before I died, if I could just get some medicine to stop this infection in my baby, if I could just learn to read and write, if I just didn't have to go off to war, if I didn't just have to walk down that path in the middle of the night to that outhouse when it's cold. Oh, my life would be so good if those things happened. And yet, none of us have to do any of those things. And yet we sit here this morning thinking, oh, my life is not quite what I wish it were. The life of my loved one is not quite like I wish it were. The life of this world is not quite like I wish it were. What do we do? What do we do with this longing? Well, the Apostle Paul says in Romans, the 8th chapter, that longing was put in you and me for a reason. Because God works through that longing to motivate us and guide us to accept and to achieve and pursue a better world, a world that's more according to God's design. We just have to get through this time. How do we deal with that longing, that deep sense that this is not what I wanted for this person or that person or my life or this world? You know, this letter was written to people who suffered a lot more than most of us. It was written to Christians in the first century in Rome. Both the Jewish culture and the Roman culture had rejected Jesus' message and had passed laws allowing the persecution, the torture, and even the killing of Christians. How did they make it through that period where they were living between the promise of a better world and the realization of a better world and in the middle of a catastrophe of the way the world was? Paul says the way they got through it was with hope. By hope. With hope. Hope. Not just hope in a certain outcome. That's not what biblical hope is. Hope is not just in something we want to happen, because that leads to despair when it doesn't happen, and it leads to despair when we get what we want and realize, I'm not that much happier anyway. There's something different about biblical hope. The theologian Robert Jensen says that people who use the word hope often, they mean heartfelt desire. I hope my team wins. I hope I get asked out this weekend. I hope I get accepted by this university. I hope. But that's a heartfelt desire. That's not hope, Jensen says. Jensen says that hope isn't about wanting this page of our life to be better or this chapter to be better. That's what we all want. We want this turn of events to work out. We want this kind of thing we're longing for to occur. We ultimately want a happy ending to the story of our lives. But Jensen says this: biblical hope is not about the pages or the chapter. It's about the storyteller. It's hope in the storyteller, that there is one divine being that is writing our story with us. That's very important. Writing our story with us, not for us. No, not for us, but with us. In communion, in communication, talking to us, listening to us. That there is an unseen hand that's working in your life and in my life and in this world to bring this world according to God's design. Do you believe that? Jensen says if it's just that you want something to happen, if you just think you want something in your story, but you don't nod to the storyteller, that's not hope, that's just wishful thinking, which we all do too. But Paul says we need hope. We need hope. We need a trust. At first century folks, they didn't know if they were going to prosper or be deprived of the very basics of life. They didn't know if they were going to keep their freedom or be enslaved. They didn't know if they were going to be tortured or preserved. They didn't know if they were going to live or die. They had no way of knowing. They never knew what was going to happen next. And in a much lesser way, we don't know what's going to happen next. Have you learned that yet? You don't know what's going to happen this afternoon, really, do you? We don't know. And we hope that everything works out all right. But Jensen says, don't just hope about things working out. Put your hope in the living God who is writing this story with you and will complete the story in a good manner for the whole world as well as for you and yours. There's a book coming out that I'm looking forward to. It's written by a guy named Jonathan Lear. He's a Harvard philosopher and psychoanalyst. And just listen to the name of the book. It's kind of strange. It isn't out yet. It's coming in November, but it's called Imagining the End, Morality and the Ethical Life. It's a strange kind of thing. Here's what he says. He says that when we are in crisis, and by that he defines crisis as not having the world, our life's not going the way we want it to, or the life for someone we love is not going to, and we're thrown into crisis, and the world is not right. He says when you're in that kind of crisis, you mourn. You mourn. And that's okay. That's what we should do. You ever feel mourning when you watch the news? You know, we have Puerto Rico again, folks mourning there again, another weather tragedy. We have all sorts of things that don't work out, and we mourn them. He said, that's okay, but when you mourn, he says, we don't want you to lose your ethical bearings or your moral bearings. For he says, when people say, my life is not fair, things aren't working out like I want, he says they often drift off into all sorts of behaviors that are unethical and immoral and destructive. They give themselves over to too much alcohol, too many drugs. They throw themselves into sexual encounters that don't bring them any kind of peace or joy. They get dirty with their politics. You ever heard about that? I don't know if you've ever run into that, but they get dirty with their politics, get mean with their politics. They get unethical with their business dealings because they're trying to get control. They can't figure out how to control what's going to happen next. And he says, in those times of crisis, whether they're collective or personal, he says the same thing Jensen says, you got to hang on to hope. Hope's the only way out. And you hope, he says, not in those events because we don't even know what's going to happen next. We can't figure it out. So you don't hope that this happens or that happens. You hope that there is one above who can walk with us and help us and will bring this world to a fitting conclusion by God's grace and by God's hand, and we put our hope in that and live with all the uncertainty. Not easy, is it? Not easy. But Paul says that's all right. He says we don't even know how to pray sometimes to make things better, to make our lives better, to make somebody's life. We don't even know the words to say, but Paul says that's okay. That's okay because deep down in us, there is a spirit that is communing with God all the time, whether we know it or not. That spirit in words that are in size, he says, that are too deep for words, groaning and we need something from you, Lord. And the Lord is in communion with us, working to heal and strengthen and guide us. Even when we can't even put it into words, we don't know how to pray, we don't know what to say. Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't know how to pray? You didn't know what to pray for. You couldn't find it. Paul says that's okay. Because the Spirit of God is inside of you, praying to God anyway. There is a communion going on beyond your attention, beyond your comprehension, beyond your understanding. And it's pulling you and moving you in the way that God would have you to go. We're back to being a baby again. Did you hear that? You know, if a baby fusses long enough, somebody's going to pick that baby up. And that baby goes, you know, I have had a few. I picked up a few crying babies. I've never wakened a sleepy baby. Have you? No, that's a cardinal rule, isn't it? But when they're crying, somebody picks them up, you know. And they keep, they keep crying and fussing. You remember that? I don't know. Maybe you don't. And they keep yelling and fussing and all that kind of thing. And the parent maybe, does one of these numbers. You maybe sing them a little lullaby. You try, and you might rock them in a rocking chair, right? You might pace the floor. You're carrying that baby, and that baby doesn't even know what it needs. It doesn't even know what it needs. Just, I don't like the way things are right now. And every parent's had that moment where, just tell me what's wrong. If you just tell me what's wrong, I'll do anything. But the baby can't tell you. He can't tell you, or you can't understand. You don't speak his language. You don't know. But you carry that baby a while, see? And you rock that baby and you sing the lullaby and you love that baby, and eventually that baby has this conclusion. I don't know what I need, and I'm not sure this person knows what I need, but I know this person loves me. I know they're going to carry me through this world. I know they're going to be with me. And the baby relaxes. The baby relaxes. That was John Burns' Parenting 101. That's you and me. See, we got these longings, these desires, this unhappiness with the way our life is, the way somebody we love is going, the way the world is going. And I don't like this, God. Oh, I don't like the way this is going, God. And we don't really hear direct words from God, and maybe we can't make sense of what we're feeling to God, but we come to the realization after a while, someone is carrying me through. Someone greater than me has me in loving arms, and they will see me through. And we relax. We rely. That's what Paul's saying is going on in us. Oh, that's such good news for you. Do you have anybody in your life who maybe is not walking very close to the Lord right now? Do you know anybody who never goes to church, doesn't pray much, maybe even a little antagonistic about the church? Any of you know anybody who's not in church this morning? Two people over here, one here. Yeah, we all know. Come on, wake up. You all know. And if you love them, you're worried about them. Because you think they don't even pray. They don't even go to church. I don't know. Relax. The Holy Spirit is inside of them, bearing witness to their spirit. They don't even know it. They can't even verbalize it. They don't even have an intellectual composition. You know, if you were here last week, you maybe are thinking, isn't this polar opposite of what you preached last week? And maybe you're thinking, that's so often true of you, John. And one week you say one thing, and the other thing the opposite. You have us more confused than we've ever been. Well, if you were here last week, you're right. This is exactly the opposite of what I said last week. Last week I said when you pray, you have to stop and sort through all the thoughts. Do you remember that? It was a whole week ago. And you get all these thoughts, some of them silly, some of them useful, some of them practical. I got to get up and do this. Some of them worrisome and toxic, some of them sinful. And they all are in there bouncing around in your head. But if we can sort them like we sort the laundry, put this in that pile and this, that pile, then pretty soon we can begin to hear the voice of God, which is pure and gentle and healthy and steady and loving, and we can hear that voice and we can respond to it. I still stand by that sermon. I thought it was pretty good. But that's not the only way prayer is done. And thank God it isn't. Sometimes the prayer is beyond our recognition and cognition. Sometimes the prayer is at such a deep level, we don't even know what we're praying. But we are in communion with God, and God is in healing power with us, and we are changed. We are changed, and the world begins to change, and we relax. And then we get to our favorite verse. One of our favorite verses is the last verse in this text. I don't like the way it's translated, though. We know that all things work together for good. No, we don't. No, we do not. No, anybody here think you do that? No. A lot of things work together for nothing. We know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. That is a bad translation. What we know is God works all things together for good for those who are called according to his purpose, love God. God is the worker. That first translation makes me think of jigsaw puzzle pieces, and that's our life. There's pieces of it everywhere, and that we have this faith that one day they're just going to all jump in together and there's a beautiful picture there. I've never had that happen. I do not think it will ever happen. But I do believe there is a God who, when I give him the pieces of my life, can put that together to make sense and a beautiful life and a contribution to this world and move us all a little closer to God's design. That's reassuring to me. The individual days get rocky Individual chapters can be not good. We can go through phases that are really rough. And it helps me a lot to know that the communion of God with my spirit is guiding me, and God is able to take whatever happens and put it together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purposes. Normally, I end my sermons with a story. Have you noticed that? I often have a story. This Sunday, I don't have a story because I want you to tell yourself a story. Just walk with me just a minute. I want you to tell yourself a story. I want you to think back on your life to a time where you were in crisis, where you didn't know how it was going to work out. Maybe you lost somebody that you loved to death. Maybe you lost a job. Maybe you had a divorce. Maybe somebody told you that something you thought you were great at, you weren't that great at. Maybe you got lost along the way. One difficulty after another. Maybe you got sick or lived in pain. Can you think of a time? Can you think of a time when it was really tough, when it wasn't clear, when you didn't know what was going to happen next? After last Sunday's sermon, more than one of you came out and said, you know, I thought the sermon was helpful, but I got to tell you this. In the biggest times of my life, I didn't know where God was. I couldn't find God. I didn't know if God knew me. I didn't know if I knew God. But now looking back on those difficulties, I can see God was using that to change me and help me and get me through a crisis. I now can see God. I could not see God at the time. Do you have a story like that, where you just couldn't find God in the moment? But now looking back, you see, somebody was carrying you through. Do you have such a story? Maybe 2 or 3, maybe 5 or 6. Well, tell yourself that story. Tell yourself that story as often as you need to tell yourself that story. Every day, if you need to, until you remember that hope is what's going to get me through. And there is a divine storyteller. There is a divine puzzle maker who is working things out in my life. I do not know what's going to happen next, but I do know that God will carry me through. My hope is in God. Tell yourself that story so that you can go into a hidden future, but not a scary one. So that you can go into an unclear future, but not an uncertain one. So you can go through difficulties, but they won't become disasters because your hope is in God. Amen. Amen.